How's it going, people? Hope you're all doing well. This is a video that I wanted to make, like really wanted to make, because it concerns a topic that I'm very, very, very passionate about. So lately, if you don't know, there's been a lot of discussion or talk or, you name it, revolving Kiwami 3 once again. The RGG Summit is going to be next month, and people are speculating as to what game it might be or whether a Kiwami 3 is warranted. That's the main topic of this video, Kiwami 3. Now, I've seen Snowiest's video on this, and that's actually what sparked a lot of this debate. His video is simply titled, Why We Need a Kiwami 3. And I watched the video, all of it, and, for those who didn't watch it, go watch it, because it's not just as simple as, oh, Yakuza bad, we need a Kiwami game, right? He actually does go through every fault of Yakuza 3 that he can think of, and, there are things that obviously didn't age well. That goes for a lot of games, really, even ones that come out recently. Any given game is bound to have, some faults. Could be just small bugs, could be game-breaking bugs. I mean, thankfully, Yakuza 3 doesn't have that, I don't think. But, it does have some faults. And I feel like whenever it comes to this Kiwami topic, whenever we talk about why we don't need a Kiwami 3, I feel like people almost never try to go into the faults of the original Yakuza 3. And I'm saying this, by the way, as a Yakuza 3 defender. People... we all know the Yakuza 3 reputation, right? There are people that don't like that game, for different reasons. Some of them, it could be the story. For others, it's the jankier gameplay and it being a bit rough around the edges compared to other games. At least, that's what they think, not me. But for someone like me in my position, I understand why people would want a Kiwami of 3. Right? Because here's the thing, there's always this topic about, oh, does this game really need a remake? It doesn't need a remake. Like, it's new or recent or whatever. In Yakuza 3's case, the game came out in like 2009, which is 15 years ago. Holy shit, time flies by. But what I'm trying to say is, whether or not we think a game needs a remake, doesn't really matter sometimes. So look at Resident Evil 4. A lot of people thought Resident Evil 4, like, really doesn't need a remake. What does Capcom go and do? They remake Resident Evil 4. Was it a good game? Hell yeah, it was. Now, mind you, I think even Resident Evil 4 Remake is not a perfect game. I have my own problems with the Resident Evil 4 Remake, but it is a good game. Now, maybe someone doesn't like that remake, but you have to look at the majority here. What does the majority think? Do 90 or 80% people think it's a good game? Well, it's generally considered a good game then. Now, if we talk about Yakuza 3 and the possibility of a Kiwami 3, for example, maybe there are people who think it's not necessary or that the original is good enough. But then, what's the percentage of the people who think it's good enough versus the percentage of people who want to see a Kiwami 3. That doesn't mean either side is wrong, of course. It just means that there's an objective number of people that might want a Kiwami over, the people that don't want a Kiwami. Something that I don't really get is when people get upset that, somebody mentions a certain game should get a Kiwami. Now, in some cases, I do kind of get it. Like, if somebody mentions a Kiwami 0, maybe give that a few years. I think Yakuza 0 still is a game that you can play much better than Yakuza 3. You have a lot more side activities in Yakuza 0 than you do in Yakuza 3. You have a lot more variety in combat in Yakuza 0 versus Yakuza 3. And most people are going to tell you the story of Yakuza 0 is, better than Yakuza 3. So, will a Kiwami 0 happen? Maybe. Eventually. Now, see, I think we don't need a Kiwami 0, but will it happen? Maybe. We don't know. And again, something that I think people shouldn't gloss over, at least when it comes to, voicing their opinions against the Kiwami game, is the fact that, the original games do have faults. And whenever this conversation gets brought up, like, oh, this game doesn't need a Kiwami, people need to appreciate the original more often. Okay, sure. But have you considered why people want a Kiwami? Like, trust me, it's not always just, oh, Yakuza or, that kind of thing. Snowiest in his video mentioned quite a few things that didn't really age well in Yakuza 3, and again, that's why I tell you, if you didn't watch that, and if you think we don't need the Kiwami 3, you can watch that. Now, do I have like a hard-on for Kiwami 3? Do I want a Kiwami 3 so bad? No, I don't really want a Kiwami 3. But if it happens, hey, cool, we have a new game to play. I still think, that a Kiwami game is gonna give us a different enough experience, and I think it'll be fun. I feel like a lot of people really overlook how fun the Dragon engine is at this point of time. People look back at Kiwami 2 and they're like, oh my god, We don't need a pile of shit like this. But really, if you look at the combat of Gaiden, for example, and I know some people might have their issues with the Gaiden combat, they did make some weird decisions, to be fair, like removing some moves, giving some weird restrictions to some moves, but also, the combat felt good. Again, I'll say that the combat is very limited, probably because it's a shorter game, so they thought, what the hell, let's just limit the combat. But if we have the Gaiden combat, with combat that has a lot more options, then oh my goodness. If you want to know why I just want to kind of roll my eyes when I see somebody so passionately against a Kiwami game, I'll tell you why. It's not because I really want a Kiwami 3, but it's usually because they don't really acknowledge why people want those remakes. And also, they actually might just not have enough knowledge. Like, they could be talking without knowing what they're talking about. I'll tell you an example. I came across somebody on, I think it was on Twitter at some point. He said he really didn't like Gaiden's combat because you couldn't juggle. My brother. Yes, you can. So at times, I just look at what people have to say and I'm like, are we playing the same franchise? Because it doesn't feel that way. I am a huge fan of original Yakuza 1, right? I love Yakuza 1 more than I love Yakuza 2 even. Despite the clunky combat of Yakuza 1 and how Yakuza 2's combat is way better and smoother. Now, I'm weird like that, but that's just how I am. To me, when somebody like Snowiest makes a whole video, you know, trying to say why we need a Kiwami 3, and he actually does his research as to what he finds troublesome with that game, I'm like, yeah, sure, okay. You know, he did his research. He does show the footage for it. But for some reason, people still refuse to acknowledge that stuff. Just because you're willing to put up with the annoyances of an older game doesn't mean everybody else wants to do that. And that's okay. At some point, you yourself might come across a game where a mechanic just doesn't hit for you. Something that I see almost nobody mention when it comes to, you know, respecting the original Yakuza games and going back and playing them, is the fact that the OG Yakuza games have no sub-story markers. And so what do the people that want to do all the sub-stories do? Like, yeah, sure, they can try and walk at every single pixel of Kamurocho and Sotenbori trying to find every possible sub-story, but something else to consider is that a lot of the sub-stories in the OG Yakuza 1 and 2 are timed. So if you miss out on them, then GG, they're gone. And also, you can fail sub-stories, so if you don't know the right answer, or if you somehow, by mistake, pick something that is, you know, not the right option, well, I think Amon gets locked out, so well played. Essentially, if you want to do all the sub-stories or, you know, fight Amon, you might have to use a guide. And I understand that using a guide is something that some of you aren't opposed to, but not everybody wants to play with a guide on all the time. Another thing to consider is the fact that OG Yakuza 1 and 2 don't really have minigames, at least as much as we, you know of now. Like, yeah, cool, you have 3-4 different gambling stuff, and then the UFO catcher, and a single arcade game, and the batting center. A Kiwami 3 might mean we get brand new minigames. I just feel like a lot of the Kiwami topic is people that are traumatized by Kiwami 2, maybe, because, you know, for one reason or another, like, there's a more than a few things in Kiwami 2 that are wrong. And I feel like because they might have had like a bad experience with Kiwami 2, that they might expect the same for Kiwami 3. And I mean, hey, at the end of the day, a Kiwami title is gonna mean they reuse a shit ton of stuff, right? That's just how it is. But at this point of time, the Dragon Engine is the best it ever was. Now, if they take an experimental approach like with Ishin Kiwami and they decide to do Unreal, yeah, I can understand why people would be upset. They wanted to kind of test things out with Unreal Engine 4 and Ishin, and as a result, some questionable changes were made. I'm not sure if those changes would still be there if they didn't switch and just wanted to rebalance the game. Like, it's really hard to say. So, bottom line, is it going to be a disaster if Kiwami 3 happens? I don't think so. Again, I think it's going to be a different enough experience, and maybe people might be upset by the fact that, you know, they could have done something else. But I mean, the Kiwami games really are just budget titles, and they're gonna work on something else eventually. We're talking about RGG Studio. They have like 2 releases a year at this point. So, I don't know. I feel like there's something for everybody. If you really enjoy OG Yakuza 3, then that's amazing, because I do as well. But at the same time, I can see why people want that game to be remade. One of the things that Snowiest mentioned, I believe, is the fact that when it comes to combat, you really don't have that many options compared to other games. You're gonna find yourself repeating the same couple of moves every now and then, and you really have to go out of your way to make sure that you're not repeating the same moves. There's just some moves in OG3 that are more efficient than others, and you have to kind of end up resorting to those. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video real quick. Like, as you can see, there's not even any editing almost. I wanted to make this video while the topic is still hot, and I just want to leave you guys with one message. Actually, one message to the RGG devs. If you guys are making Kiwami 3, I better see an extension of the Tamiya part. Instead of a 26-minute info dump, make it an hour. Peace.